Hello, Mr. Brickwood here. Welcome back. We are going to be talking about the island of Cuba. Before we do, this is brought to you by Giant Eagle red wine vinegar. Um, Absolutely delicious. It's great for salads and recipes. And if you've never had red wine vinegar, it doesn't matter if it's Giant Eagle or any brand, they all taste the same. So, with that being said, we're going to go to Cuba. Cuba, which is actually located 90 miles off the southeastern coast of the United States, off of Florida, was actually a place that many Americans would travel to on vacation. Today we go down to Myrtle Beach, we go to Hilton Head. Many Americans did actually, instead of going to those places, they went down to Cuba. They went to primarily Havana, which is the capital of Cuba. And there was actually a casino there that many Americans would go down to, and they would travel and play in those casinos. Now, we're looking at Cuba, focused primarily on Cuba from 1959 to 62. But as always, we have to have context first. Now, looking at Cuba, as you can see, as I mentioned, many Americans travel down here. They stay at the Havana Riviera, which today is no longer a hotel, from my understanding. It's actually just an apartment complex. But many Americans would travel here, and there's a casino here, and they would stay here, much like a resort we go to in Mexico today. And we see that a lot of people go down there. We have the vintage cars. This is going to be a place of travel, and we must understand, though, the context of how Cuba became a place with American interest. Now, we're looking here on the right, we see a picture of Christopher Columbus, and we see in the red here, we have the Spanish Empire. It will be Spain who sends Columbus over to the New World, the Americas, and he's going to bring back riches upon riches upon riches for the Spanish Empire. And you can see Spain was once a dominant power in the world, and they are going to take control of places over in even the Far East, such as the Philippines, and they're also going to take control of Cuba, amongst many other areas and countries. Now we look here, they were very strong at one time, but as we know, nothing in this world lasts forever, whether you're talking human being, whether you're talking automobile, whether you're talking empire. And it's the easiest lesson we all learn the hardest way, and all good things must come to an end. So we look at Spain, who controlled Cuba for quite some time, looking at the 16th century on through, even up through the end of the 19th century. Spain was an empire, though, that was on the left. It was on a decline. It was an empire that was feeble. It was no longer what it used to be. And we had a nice, young, rising star over here on the right going after that throne. This young star over here would be the United States of America. And we're going to see that America has always had interest because of geography in Cuba. They looked at it as a gateway of the Caribbean and into South America, and they looked at it as a protectorate to protect ourselves from any kind of foreign invasion. We offered Spain to purchase Cuba off them for $100 million. They declined. We were more worried about a strong European country like England or France or Germany buying that and being right in our backyard. So this was a concern for America, so we did want to have our hands on Cuba. Now, to give this context, 1890, officially they say the frontier is closed, that there's no more expansion to the west because we've already conquered the continent of the United States. So we kind of have a crisis, and we start to look out, and Cuba will be one of the natural places we want to defend. Now, Cubans in Cuba wanted their independence from Spain, who occupied them. So they're going to start having a revolution against the Spanish, and the Spanish are going to do all they can to put down this revolution. And the Cubans will use guerrilla tactics, hit and run. This will be very similar to what's going to happen in Vietnam about 60, 70 years after this revolution. And the Spanish are going to try to kill the fish by draining the sea. And what I mean by that is they're going to attempt to take the population away from the guerrilla fighters, and they're going to put them in concentration camps. Now, in America, we look at the Cuban people as being oppressed, and there was a thing called yellow journalism in America, where you had two competing agencies between Pulitzer and Hearst, who were two competing writers in America, owned two newspaper articles or empires, and they're going to compete with bringing up the muck. They're going to bring to the forefront all the atrocities that happen in Cuba and give them to the American people. And again, they're competing to sell newspapers. And the more newspapers they sell, the more money they make. So they're going to be competing in Cuba, and how the Cubans are treated during this unrest, this revolution going on in Cuba. And America is going to really be encouraged to get involved in Cuba and to kind of help the Cuban people get their independence from Spain. So we're looking at 1898. We're going to send a USS Maine over here down to Cuba, right off the coast of Havana, to let the Spanish know that we're kind of watching. And a lot of Americans are trying to press the President of the United States at this time to get involved in Cuba and go to war with Spain to help out the Cuban people. And the president over here is none other than your boy from your backyard, William McKinley. And William McKinley is going to be the last president who was actually a general in the U.S. Civil War. And he was not just a typical general. He was somebody who actually fought at the Battle of Antietam. And Antietam was the single day, it was the bloodiest battle in a single day in the United States history. And it was a bloody affair. So if somebody like President McKinley saw this blood and all these this gore on the battlefield, he's going to be somebody who's more of a pacifist. He knows what war brings. He's really trying to tell the American people he does not want war with Spain. However, turn of events, the USS Maine will suddenly just explode off the coast of Cuba, and many Americans blame the Spanish for carrying out some kind of attack on this ship, this American ship. I believe over, I don't remember the exact amounts, number of sailors, U.S. sailors end up dying, and America is really wanting war. Another thing that'll kind of push this on will be a diplomat from Spain, who's in Cuba in an embassy, will send a telegraph to the Spanish leaders in Spain and tell them that McKinley, don't worry about it, he's soft, he's weak, he's not a competent president, which will obviously irk and raise some ire with McKinley. So America will declare war on Spain in 1898. This will be known as the Spanish-American War. And when British soldiers find out that America is going off to fight against this mighty Spanish Empire, and these quotations, because Spain, we got to understand, they still are considered mighty and powerful, even though they're not. On paper, they still look strong. And they have this country, the Philippines, under occupation, who's also carrying out a revolution against Spain. So there's a lot of unrest in this empire at the turn of the 20th century, end of the 19th century. And many of the British and American sailors get along very well over in China, and when the British find out that they're now friends, sailors, the Americans are going to head over to the Philippines to fight the Spanish. They're going to be worried about them. A lot of them are going to cry, thinking that they're going to die out there. But instead, they go over, and America goes into Cuba, and they go into the Philippines, and they defeat Spain in a rather, I think it was 2 months. In America, it's known as a splendid little war. From the American perspective, it's kind of a two-sided coin. Where in Spain, if you look at history books over there, they call it the disaster. This was horrific for Spain because they lose their empire. It's great for America because we gain an empire outside of the continental United States. And if you look here at this picture, you can see where some of the land we're going to gain from Spain giving it up to us. Puerto Rico, which we still have influence and control today, the Philippines, same as that, Guam, and Cuba. So you can see that we are going to grow as a result of this Spanish-American War, this splendid little war we call it. Here's a nice little picture. It kind of reinforces how grand this war was to us. If you look at the United States, the size of us in 1783, up through 1803 to 1819, as you see, we're growing. We're still growing. 1861, it's right at the start of the Civil War. And then you can see by the end of the 19th century, pretty big. But let's look here by the end of the Spanish-American War, which is only a year's time. Look how big our empire is. And we gained the respect of all these countries in Europe as a result of beating Spain finally. There's actually a big fear in Europe that America is eventually going to come over and take over all of Europe, which we kind of will influence a lot of Europe with the Marshall Plan. We'll never actually take over Europe, but will have a ton of influence up to the present day. Now, we didn't know this, but the Spanish-American War actually will help us lead us on a collision course with another empire in that area, because with America gaining access over here to the Philippines and Guam, we now are growing our empire to the Pacific. Well, there's another empire called Japan who's actually growing over there as well. And there's going to be a collision course at Pearl Harbor in 1941 eventually. Now, just again, seeing that cause and effect, that's what I'll make sure I hit on. Now, we're looking here back to Cuba, looking at a guy by last name Batista. Batista was a general. He was beloved by the people at first, but eventually he becomes very corrupt in Cuba, and he's going to use his money. He's going to become very greedy. He's going to take and control a lot of the politics, sets up a dictatorship, and many of the Cubans are fed up with how corrupt Cuba's got. They're also fed up with watching Americans come down to Cuba and pretty much do whatever they want. And not be punished if they committed any crimes. And there's a lot of, they're fed up with America and their companies, sugar companies especially, taking all this money and making all this money off the Cuban people. And a lot of the Cubans view themselves as being oppressed and abused by the Americans after we take control of it, after the Spanish-American War, or we influence it, I should say. And we're going to see that there's going to be a rising former lawyer in his late 20s, I believe, who's going to start to lead a guerrilla campaign against Batista. Nobody really takes him seriously at first, but eventually he's going to actually he's going to force out Batista from office. He's going to be forced into exile, Batista, and this guy will take power. And his name is none other than Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro will not only just take power, he'll actually pretty quickly nationalize, meaning he'll take control of all those sugar companies inside of Cuba, the sugar plantations from American business owners, and he'll also nationalize he'll actually shut down the casinos, which are actually run by American mobsters. Your mobsters of the day were the ones who actually made the most money and had the most influence on these casinos in Cuba. So they're going to be very upset with Castro as well. Many of them want to see Castro killed. Many of these, obviously, sugar plantation owners who are American want to see Castro ousted as well. And Castro is going to understand this, and America will set up an embargo, meaning we will refuse to trade with Cuba until they change their policies, till Castro changes his policies, which he will not do. Now, what Castro decides to do instead, he's going to actually turn to a friend of, I should say an enemy of the United States. And you guys should know who that is during the Cold War, who the main enemy of the United States. And he's going to become a little more communist leaning. Now, we must understand this. Communism, this picture kind of hits on the left, was always an oceans away. It was always across the Atlantic Ocean or across the Pacific in China. It was always across the Atlantic Ocean in the Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe. Now, with it being in Cuba, it is only 90 miles away from the coast of the United States. So we are spooked in 1959 when Castro takes power, 1960, because now we see communism in our backyard, which is going to be something that we view as a thorn in America's side. You guys can see how close it is. And you can see communism now is that whole domino effect, that containment there. We see it possibly spreading. We're panicked in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and we want to get rid of this thorn in our side. So we have Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA at the time. He's going to lead, come up with a way to maybe get rid of Castro. And he was kind of the Wizard of Oz. So he could pull strings and he can make leaders disappear. Let's just kind of have a quick rundown. We remember this guy back in the 1950s, Mohammad Mossadegh. And he's going to be overthrown and replaced by the Shah, because the CIA is going to orchestrate this in Iran. And the Shah will take power up until, and that was around 1954, I believe, up until 1979, when he'll be ousted and Ayatollah will take power. But we look here, the CIA was able to orchestrate that, so they're very confident. They do the same thing in Guatemala. An elected official he does not align himself with the United States, so we have him overthrown. The CIA orchestrates this as well, overthrown by a military general in Guatemala. And that guy will take power, and he leads a ruthless campaign on his enemies, like most military dictators do. So we don't really respect the democracies. We're more worried about, are they aligned with us economically? Will they do business with us? So the CIA in early 1950s, Allen Dulles, he feels like if he just snaps his fingers, he can make leaders disappear. So he's very confident, full of hubris, full of cockiness, and he's going to lead he's going to have a plan to oust Castro in Cuba, which would make the mobsters and make the business owners and many of the American people feel much safer having communism extradited from our backyards. Now, the CIA is going to carry out this operation. He's going to pitch it to Eisenhower in office, and Eisenhower is going to say, no, I'm leaving office. I'm not getting my name on that. Maybe the next president will go ahead and carry that invasion plan through. And it's called Operation Mongoose. And Dulles is going to meet with the next president. His name's John F. Kennedy. He's going to pitch it to him, and Kennedy says, sure, let's get rid of Castro in Cuba. And we must understand the context. It's Cold War. Kennedy's been campaigning. He's going to be strong on communists. He's going to make sure he goes after communist leaders. And he will do just that with the operation called the Bay of Pigs. This is where the American CIA will train about 1,500 Cuban exiles. These are Cubans who left Cuba because Castro took power. They were fleeing. And the CIA is going to train them with military exercises. And we're going to drop them off on the Bay of Pigs in 1961, April of 1961. It was actually 2 days after Yuri Gagarin travels up to space, and he's the first Russian to reach space. So we're going to land these exiles on the Bay of Pigs, but Kennedy will not provide air cover. And these ships, actually, you couldn't tell here, but there's a bunch of coral reefs here. So when the ships are trying to get on shore at this place called the Bay of Pigs, it's actually one of Castro's favorite fishing spots in Cuba. They're going to hit these coral reefs, and they won't even get on shore, many of them. And those who do, it's going to be an absolute slaughter. And of the invasion forces, all of them are captured or killed. And it is a embarrassing time for the CIA and Kennedy. Now, there's a meme, you invaded the Bay of Pigs. Please tell me more about how successful you were. Now, Kennedy does a very admirable thing. He could have pointed fingers at Dulles, he could have pointed fingers at the CIA, he could have pointed fingers at somebody, but he just tells the American people, my bad. I planned the invasion. It failed. My apologies. And actually his approval rating goes up as a result of him going on public and actually admitting his mistakes, which is a life lesson for all of us to just, if you make a mistake, just own it. It's much more admirable than lying and trying to pass the buck and point fingers at other people. And another reason why he was beloved because of it, because he campaigned on the fact that he'd be strong on communism. And although the Bay of Pigs was a failure, it's going to reinforce that he's going to be strong on communism. Kennedy. So this is going to reinforce to Castro that the Americans are really going after him. So he's going to even have a tighter relationship with the Soviet Union, with Nikita Khrushchev. Now, Khrushchev looks at this Bay of Pigs invasion and says, the Soviet Union's been saying to the world this whole time that the Americans are imperialists. All they want to do is interfere with other people's problems. They're going to want to overthrow. They want to control. And Nikita Khrushchev, it's a propaganda gem for him, the Bay of Pigs. And he's going to view Kennedy as weak as a result of doing this because it was such a failure. So Khrushchev's going to do something very bold. Okay, it's going to lead into something 16 months later, about a year and a half later, after the Bay of Pigs. And that is, he's going to start sending nuclear missiles, building launch sites in Cuba, pointed at the United States. And these launch sites will be constructed, and they're aimed at all throughout the United States. You can see where they could reach. It's right in our backyard, again, 90 miles away from the United States, Cuba is. And you can see that Americans are very worried that Hiroshima and much more devastating bombs at this time are going to be attacking the major cities throughout the United States. And we must be conscious of the fact that Canton and Akron being home to rubber and steel technology with Timken and Goodyear, it would be possibly a target during this during any kind of missile strike on the United States. Now, we're looking here. This leads to a crisis known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. It lasts 13 days, where the Americans are going to find out through U-2 spy planes taking pictures over Cuba that these sites are being installed. And President Kennedy is eventually going to tell the American people that, yes, the Soviets have built missile sites in Cuba under point to the United States. This is going to spook the American people, and many of Kennedy's advisors tell him, hey, we got to bomb them. We got to bomb them. We got to invade Cuba. And Kennedy's going to decide that's too bold. That could lead to nuclear war. They have a stare down. They have a chess match. And instead, Kennedy's going to give a blockade, also known as a quarantine, around Cuba, which is going to block any future ships coming into Cuba. And Khrushchev's going to say that we won't stop. And he's going to send ships, and everybody's kind of anticipating, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when these ships are coming to this blockade, these ships around Cuba. And Khrushchev actually blinks first, and he actually has his ships stop, and they're eventually going to turn around instead of being searched by American ships. And they will actually pick up the telephone, and they'll have conversation, and they'll figure out a way to keep the United States, or I should say, get the Soviet Union pulled missiles out of Cuba. And what the agreement was is America promised that they would not attack Cuba. They would let Castro stay in power. They won't have any future transgressions against him, and that they would take their nuclear missiles out of Turkey that were pointed at the Soviet Union. And this will lead to the Soviets pulling the missiles out of Cuba, which will lead to Castro really being angry. I guess he broke a mirror when he found out that the Soviets are taking their missiles out, and he's going to be very upset. But he has no control over those missiles. Those are Soviet-controlled missiles. And we see the 13-day crisis avoided. This is October of 1962. This is Kennedy's shining moment in office. So if you're going to say Kennedy was a great president, this would be your argument why. It's the number one reason why he was a great president was this avoiding this. So this is Cuba. I gave you the context of how we got there with the Spanish-American War. We took control, we had influence, and then eventually Castro takes power, sets up a communist state. We want to overthrow him, and that'll lead to the Bay of Pigs, and the Bay of Pigs will lead to the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we see this cause and effect always in history. It's always there, and you guys have a fantastic rest of the semester. I appreciate all you do. And again, it reinforces Kennedy's decision to blockade, Khrushchev's decisions, Castro's decisions. You see the power of the individual in history, always. Thank you for listening.